Okay. Okay, we're live and let's wait for a couple of seconds, just a little bit, just to wait for people to log in. How are you guys doing? Are you ready?
Mm-hmm. I'm well.
Okay.
Yeah, ready to go.
Okay.
All set.
Good, good. Let's see. I see people logging in, so let's just give it another 30 seconds or something. Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're about to start today's webinar. You can see our presenters are already on the starting block, or blocks, since there are two of them. All right, let's get started. And once again, hello, everyone. Welcome to today's GALA webinar. My name is Isabella Massardo. I'm content strategist here at GALA. And today's webinar is centered around a classic topic that always attracts a lot of people. And it's also always a lightning rod for discussion, MT and quality evaluation. So you can see our speakers, Anna Zareskaya and Thai Trainer from TransPerfect. They're ready to start. But I'd like to remind you that you can use the QA box to submit your questions at any time during the webinar. And as time allows, we will address as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. We'll have a QA session. This webinar will be recorded, and I'll share the link with you in a follow-up email tonight. And the recording will also be published on the GALA website. Anna and Thai, I'm going to leave the virtual floor to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Isabella. Hi, everyone. Really excited to have you all here in our webinar that's called This MT is Bad or Is It? How MT quality evaluation can help you make the right business decisions. My name is Anna Zareczka. I work as a director of MT strategy and implementation at TransPerfect. I've been with TransPerfect for almost 5 years now, based out of Barcelona. Now I'm in rainy Moscow, and yeah, Thai, over to you.
Great. Yeah, my name is Thai Trainer. I am also on the MT implementation and strategy team. And I'm also, like Anna, about to have my 5-year anniversary at TransPerfect. And I'm based in Porto. So nice and hot today. Great.
Yeah, thanks. Let's get started.
Perfect.
All right, so here's what we're going to talk about in this webinar. First, we will explain why we actually chose this topic and how it's related to what Thai and I do at TransPerfect. Then we will make an overview of what we as a company work on when it comes to MT. We will cover the main scenarios of how and why you would typically need to evaluate MT. And then Thai will present some real life examples of how machine translation was evaluated and some do's and don'ts. And we will conclude by sharing the 3 main takeaways you really want to remember from this webinar. And also we will discuss what we think will be the next, the next trends in MT evaluation in the following years. And of course, we will leave some time for questions. So before we start, though, we would like you to participate in a little game or a brainstorming session, and to help us see what our participants think about MT quality. So use one word to describe MT quality.
Yes, and to participate in the poll, and we really encourage everybody to add some answers here. We're going to see a word cloud eventually, and based on this, we'll sort of understand how we can set the tone and how we can understand how the audience here thinks about MT quality. To participate, you can use this URL here. So that's poll, POLLEV.com. And then you'll want to add in /ThaiTrainer153. And there you can submit what you think about MT quality. Okay, we've got some good things flowing in so far. Purpose, varied fit, okay. Decent, that's good.
And you can repeat, right? If you see a word that was on your mind already, it's okay to just put it as well.
Absolutely. And one thing that's cool about this word cloud is as folks add in duplicate responses like improving, they will appear larger. So here we've got varied and improving with
Nice.
various responses. Okay, we've got some good stuff coming in. The cloud is looking nice and full.
Uh-huh.
Okay, it's still growing. This is good. And I'm happy to see the word good being added as well.
Right.
And decent as
And
well.
excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Okay, let's give it maybe a couple more seconds.
Okay, it looks like the poll is full and is no longer accepting responses, which I think is okay because it looks like we've got a good amount of responses here.
Yeah. So what do you think, Ty? I think it's very positive. Like I see improving, good, but also unpredictable. I was not expecting this so much.
Stick. Yeah. So it's kind of a mixed bag of responses, right?
Exactly. I was expecting some of it, but for example, unpredictable is a little surprising to me. But yeah, this really gives us a good, background for the presentation and an overview of what really our attendees think about MT quality. All right, nice.
Perfect.
Let's move on to the next slide then.
Okay.
All right, so why did we choose this topic for the webinar, right? Just to give you some background. So Ty and I work in the MT implementation team, as we said, and what our team does is help our customers use MT in the most beneficial way for them, right? And this, of course, means helping them evaluate MT quality, choose the best MT system and the best MT strategy, really, planning pilot projects and so on. And what we've seen a lot is that there are discrepancies between what our customers are trying to achieve and how they approach MT evaluation. So the success criteria they set for themselves or the KPIs. And that's why we really wanted to talk about this topic specifically today and share some of our experiences, really.
Perfect. Yeah, and when we say our experiences, what we mean is, the experience of machine translation sort of as a program here at TransPerfect. So here is a slide just to very briefly give a high-level overview to anybody who might not be familiar with TransPerfect. So we've been around for about almost 29 years now, and one of the sort of defining features is that we've seen constant growth. And actually, this growth is really heavily supported by one of our major areas of operation, which is, in fact, machine translation. So at TransPerfect, we have two primary approaches to offering machine translation, which are software, so on the left here, and then service on the right. So in the former, MT as software, we can think of things like the AI portal, which is a standalone, a cloud-based MT platform, but also things like an API for delivering raw MT, and then sort of connecting MT to other CMSs via plugins, et cetera. And on the right side here, when we think about services, our primary service offering when it comes to MT is MT post-editing. And really, it actually accounts for around 70% of all of the translations we produce as a company. So I think that kind of alludes to the fact that MT does hold, a very significant, a pretty fundamental role of our operations at TransPerfect. So when we talk about MT post-editing, I think it's helpful to look at sort of a standard workflow just to kind of understand where MT fits into the wider process. The workflow we employ is pretty straightforward. It's pretty standard, of course, with TM leverage happening first, and then everything that's not pulled by the TM, so anything that's new, is sent to MT, and then that's sent along to the humans that are involved in the process. So first up, we've got the post editors who will revise the content, bring it up to a desired level of quality, and then any proofreaders or additional quality steps that happen before delivery. But I think when we're talking about MT evaluation, it's helpful to look at this workflow and think that evaluation can actually happen at several stages here and not just maybe at one stage. So before we even do TM leverage, this first step, before we even sort of engage in a project, we perform an evaluation of really whether MT even makes sense for a given project or for a given content type. And we like to think about what the goal is that MT is trying to achieve. And once we've established that goal and once we've established that it makes sense to use MT, then we can also perform another evaluation of, for example, what kind of engine would be the most appropriate for the given content type, for the languages, for the subject matter, the target audience, etc. So these are evaluations that are happening before the actual MT even happens itself. And then, of course, another type of evaluation that can happen in this workflow is after the post-editing phase, we can perform an analysis of the actual post-editing, the efficiency and the quality of the MT through post-editing distance. And because post-editing is such a major part of our offering, we really do use post-editing distance as the primary metric for measuring MT quality. Okay, so despite post-editing distance serving as our primary metric for measuring MT quality here at TransPerfect, it is just like any other translation quality metric. It's not without its limitations. To give a very high-level background for folks who might not be familiar with post-editing distance, basically what it does is it measures the character level changes that are required to edit a text that's produced by an MT engine and just bring it up to a desired level of quality. And so it'll express this value as a percentage, and lower percentages indicate less effort in changing the MT. So in that way, we can kind of interpret that as meaning better quality. I mentioned earlier that post-editing distance is not without its limitations. And one of the primary ones is that it does not distinguish between different types of edits. So for example, if a linguist wants to change a single preposition in the MT output, which we can think of as something that's kind of a minor change, it's not really critical, the post-editing distance will reflect that in the exact same way, and it will bear the same weight as a critical change. So think of something maybe in a life sciences text, like changing the word lung to kidney. So in this way, we can kind of see that post-editing distance does not actually discern or distinguish between the different types of edits that are made. It just kind of gives us a general idea of the effort that was required to change MT output. And for, again, anybody who might not be familiar, I have a little diagram here just to kind of illustrate actually how post-editing distance is calculated. So we've got this source sentence here. We've got an MT candidate, which is kind of funny, of course. And we've got a classic case of a synonym here being translated incorrectly. So in the final translation, so in the post-edited version, we can see that we changed the indefinite article and then we actually swapped out that term. So 8 of the 17 characters were changed, and that gives us a post-editing distance of 47%. So 47% of the total characters required a change. Anna, I guess beyond just post-editing distance, right? That's what we use mostly here at TransPerfect. What kind of other methods of quality evaluation are out there for MT?
Yeah, so when we look for best practices, what people typically do is they look at the research community, right? So let's see what do people do in academia. So it turns out that the main or the most accurate way of evaluating MT in the research community is humans, right? So it sounds a little bit strange because humans are subjective, but really the most reliable way is this. So the example that everybody tries to follow is the WMT shared task, which is, it's like a machine translation competition. So research labs and companies submit their machine translation systems there, and they're all compared, and then there's a winner for specific translation tasks. So the method applied there is called direct assessment. And basically, in this procedure, human annotators score machine translated sentences on a scale from 0 to 100 based on their quality. And so this procedure is very thorough and accurate. There are a lot of quality checks and controls. So for example, there are several annotators per sentence. Of course, it's very costly and time consuming. So it's not always possible, of course, to carry out such an evaluation in commercial settings. So in the industry, there are some simplified versions of it, right? So people try to do something similar, but of course, maybe not as thorough or accurate. And I will give some examples also later on in the presentation. Then, of course, there are automatic metrics. So by automatic, we mean they don't involve humans. And the most well-known is, of course, the BLEU score. So everybody knows the BLEU score, and it's used based both in the research community and in the industry. And everybody knows its limitations as well, but we don't have anything better or more practical at this stage. So people still use it, right? And then there are several alternatives to BLEU score, which try to overcome its limitations. There are also other automatic metrics, such as COMET or LEPOR. COMET is a new metric, and for now, at least based on our experience at TransPerfect, it's a little bit too costly to train, and we don't see clear gains. But I'm happy to find out if there's anyone here that's using it, who's using it. And then there's also LEPOR. I've seen several companies who use it, for example. So yeah, these are other automatic metrics. And then, of course, a big topic in research is machine translation quality estimation. So what is it? So when we use BLEU or posterity distance, we have a reference translation, meaning that we have a correct translation produced by a human translator, and we compare machine translation output to it, right? So in many cases, you don't have this correct translation, so you don't have anything to compare to. That's where quality estimation is used. So you only have your source text and you have your machine translation text, and only based on these two things, you want to estimate how good this machine translation is, right? So it's a big thing in research, and in the industry, it's gaining popularity as well. We foresee a lot of interesting use cases for this in the industry. All right, so now that we've seen all these different metrics and methods, we want to ask our participants again to answer a quick poll. So Isabella, if you could bring up the poll here again. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so what we want to know is which is the main method you use to evaluate MT, if any, of course. So BLEU score, posterity distance, LEPOR, other metrics such as COMET, Meteor, etc. Or you ask human reviewers to evaluate MT output in one way or the other. So let's see.
Okay, I'm going to close the poll in 5 seconds, more or less.
All right.
All right.
Yeah, it should be fairly fast.
And here are the results for you guys.
Okay, very interesting. Mm-hmm. So 70% of the participants ask human reviewers to To assess the MT output, post-editing distance is used by 26%, and 4% use LEPOR. So this is one participant only. Yeah, very interesting. And actually, I was expecting this just based on what I see with our clients. How about you, Tai?
Yes, definitely. This definitely aligns with, I think, what we see with a lot of our clients, and it also kind of aligns with what Anna mentioned in the last slide, which is, independent of the method that's used, human assessors are usually the most reliable. So in that sense, I guess it's good to know that the general audience here is aware of that. I thought maybe we would see a couple of folks using BLEU score, but yeah, interesting.
Yeah, that was interesting, actually. All right. Very good insights. All right, so yeah, let's move on with our presentation. So there are a couple of different scenarios and situations where you will need to evaluate MT. So here they are. First, and this is probably the most common one, you want to understand if machine translation is suitable for your content. So here, for example, we know that machine translation works well for technical content, and we know that it doesn't work so well for marketing content, right? But is it really so? So maybe we have different ranges within marketing. Sometimes it can be very creative, sometimes it can be still quite dry, right? Or maybe it also can depend on the language. So even technical content might be challenging for MT depending on the language pair and so on. So you really want to have like a proper method to assess this. Then the second one, also quite common, is engine customization or improvement. So imagine you're already using MT, and maybe even you're experimenting with some machine translation providers who allow engine customization. So for example, AutoML or any other. And you really want to understand if this is something that you really need, right? You invest in this customization and you want to see how much you improve and if you improve at all, right? So that's another scenario. Then, of course, you want to be able to estimate your post-editing effort. For example, you have a team of internal post editors who are editing this machine translation, or maybe you're outsourcing your post editing to an LSP, and you want to know if, for example, how much effort your internal linguists put into this post editing, and if it's useful at all. Or you want to understand if your post-editing rates are fair based on the effort that your vendor is applying, and so on. And then the last one, and probably the trickiest, is raw machine translation. And by raw machine translation, we mean MT without any human involvement, so pure MT. And here you want to understand how good it is for the purpose, right? In many cases, you use it for understandability, for example. So you want to understand how good it is for this. All right, so now what we will do is we will look into all these scenarios and see what kind of MT evaluation methods you can apply and share some recommendations. So first one, is MT suitable for this content? So in many cases, in these situations, you would have a translation memory for this content already. So imagine it's a content that you're already translating and you want to start using MT to just increase your translation efficiencies, right? So what you would do here, then it's easy. What you would do is you use your translation memory as a reference translation, and you can calculate the BLEU score or the post-edited distance, and you get a very objective score that you can use to understand how good this MT is. And of course, then you can also compare different MT providers, and there's a lot of things that you can do with it, right? But then there are many cases where you actually don't have translation memory for this content yet. So imagine this is content that you've never translated before, And you're considering using MT because you think that it will actually allow you to translate it efficiently now. So here, what you can do is carry out a pilot project. So it's basically simulating MT deployment, and you want to define your success criteria, right? So for example, you want to understand if your translators will be able to translate this content efficiently with MT. Or you want to understand if MT will allow your translation provider, if you're outsourcing this, to actually give you the rates that would fit into your budget, right? So yeah, you can carry out a pilot project like this. And sometimes, though, you wouldn't have the budget for it, or you don't have time, and you just want some quick assessment. So here, you can resort to asking your human reviewers to provide some feedback. But it's very important here to be objective and find a quantifiable method. Instead of just asking good or bad, or provide some feedback, or is this MT okay to use, and so on, right? So using a quantifiable method will allow you also, again, to compare different vendors, right? So instructions are extremely important here. And this is some kind of a simplified version of the direct assessment method that I mentioned before, right? So here's an example of the instructions that you can provide, really defining what every score means, instead of just saying, what do you think about this MT? Okay, so let's move on to the next scenario, engine customization. So again, as I said before, you might be experimenting with different providers and customizing MT engines with your translation memories. So what you want to do is understand, okay, I'm investing in this customization. Do I really need it, and how much do I improve? So typically, these tools give you a BLEU score already when you customize an engine. So you will be able to see the BLEU score before and after customization. And you want to see that it improves compared to the baseline engine. And then you can also calculate the post-editing distance as well, if you have the capacity. So here in this example, so the challenge is you might improve in terms of quality for the content that you used for training. So content very similar to your translation memory, but as soon as your content changes a little bit, the performance will drop, right? And this is called overfitting. So in order to take that into account, you want to calculate these metrics also on a generic test set. So for example, let's see here in this table, we customized an engine for a specific content type, right? And first, let's take a look at the scores for the training test set, right? So we see that the BLEU score improved from 60 to 62, and the post-editing distance also improved from 27 to 24. So this is good result, right? But we also want to know if the general performance of the system decreased or not. So we calculate the same scores on a generic test set, and we see that the BLEU score actually dropped 1 point, and so from 58 to 57, and the post-editing distance also increased 2 percentage points. And this means that the performance decreased slightly, but this difference is not very significant. So in these situations, we actually advise to deploy this engine. So this is a consideration that you want to remember if you're doing your own engine customization. All right, next slide, please. So the next scenario that we have here is the post-editing effort. I already explained in which situations you want to measure it. So typically we measure the post-editing effort by post-edit distance, but also linguist speed, right? And it's very important to have detailed reporting where you can see edit distance based on language, based on machine translation engine, actually, very, very useful. And maybe on a project level and so on. And also over time, right? To see if it's improving or not. And here, yeah, for example, in our case, we can track both post-edit distance and the linguist speed, because these are really the two main indicators of post-editing effort. Yeah, and so the question is also how they are related, right? So we say, probably if the linguists have to edit a lot, their speed will decrease, right? So if we go to the next slide, here we have, we actually asked ourselves how these two things correlate. And here we did a little study with English into French clinical content, so clinical studies that we translate. And we took all the data from 2020. So it's interesting to see here. So if we take a look at the scatter plot on the left, this is data for one linguist only. So this linguist who worked on all this content. And we see it's pretty clear that when the post-edit distance decreases, the activity or the speed increases, right? So you can draw a line here, more or less. However, when we took the data from all linguists who worked on this content, this language pair, the picture is less clear. So you can see that it's more spread out. And this is really an indication that both post-edit distance and speed can be very individual, right? So that is why it's really recommended to use both the edit distance and the linguist speed as an indication of the post-editing effort. All right, and finally, we have the raw MT scenario. And here we have two main situations. Many of our clients use raw MT for understandability purposes, right? So you have a text in a foreign language or a document in a foreign language, and you want to understand what it's about. So when it comes to evaluating MT, you want to take into account the M task. So it can be, for example, you have internal employees who need to create some kind of reports based on those documents, or they need to fill in some data in a database, or in the life sciences setting, our clients use it to identify adverse events. And then if there's an adverse event in the report, you need to perform some actions, right? Or for customer support, imagine you have agents who are English speakers, and they want to process tickets from customers in all the languages that you support, right? So they would use machine translation to translate everything into English and then perform some actions to resolve the queries. So in each and every of these tasks, you want to keep in mind the final objective. And based on this, you will be performing your MT evaluation. So how well does this MT allow to create a report? Is it understandable? Or how well does it allow to resolve customer queries, for example? And then there's another scenario that is becoming more and more popular among our clients, and especially the IT or technical teams in the companies are dealing with this. So this is when machine translation is used in another AI application. So just to give you an example how it works, imagine you have, again, you have customer feedbacks about your product, and this feedback comes in different languages, and you want to classify it based on different features. So for example, good or bad feedback, or is it feedback about the product aspect or the product functionality, and so on, right? So you create an automatic classifier for these verbatims coming from customers, but you create it only in English. You don't want to create a classifier for every language you support, right? So then you can use machine translation to actually translate a text from Russian, Chinese, and so on into English, and then they're all classified together. So in this case, what you want to measure really is the performance of your classifier, right? You don't care about the style of the translation, you don't care about the punctuation or special characters, and so on. What you really care about is how well your classifier performs, right? So this kind of situation, or this kind of scenario really shows how different approaches to MT evaluation can be. All right. So now that we covered all the scenarios and situations, Tai, I think it's time to get into some real life examples.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, let's now pivot towards looking at a few sort of like Anna mentioned, some real case studies, right, to kind of contextualize some of the information that Anna had gone over. So if we start in life sciences, which as we know is an industry that in general has a very advanced understanding of and sort of a deep engagement with machine translation. For this client, we collaborated with them, and they are like a major medical technology and device solutions player or an organization in the space. And they were looking for support with a big rollout of their customer complaint handling service. And for this, they required raw machine translation from Japanese into English and vice versa. So specifically, the organization was hoping to use MT to help, facilitate, like Anna had mentioned, and I think maybe last slide, the adverse events that were submitted by English-speaking, that were in the customer complaints, right? And the English-speaking agents needed to be able to identify the adverse events. And so we worked with the organization to kind of develop a threshold for accuracy and also success criteria for the machine translation. And this was essentially how well the agents can identify adverse events using the raw MT. So this was, in large part what we were hoping to measure. And the method that was employed involved, several different types of evaluation criteria that we developed jointly with the team. So these are what you see here. So these, I think, 6 different categories that were weighted. And overall, we also attributed an accuracy percentage that was used to determine really the acceptability of the MT for this use case. And this accuracy percentage was set at a pretty ambitious 80%. Ultimately, what we were able to do was customize an MT engine to achieve an accuracy percentage of 88%, so above that original 80% threshold. And really what this shows is that this is a good example of how using a hybrid MT evaluation model, so one that combines an overall overarching evaluation with a clear goal, but also with different criteria, can really help to define the success criteria and really define if raw MT is the proper solution for, in this case, identifying adverse events in different customer reports. And this was also interesting because this was for a language pair that's historically presented challenges to MT. So English into Japanese and vice versa has typically been very challenging. So it was very telling, I think, that we were able to achieve an 88% accuracy for identifying adverse events, excuse me. Okay. Let's take a look at another example of a good sort of example of MT evaluation. So for this client, which is also another major player in the life sciences space, they had a human resources chatbot that was used by internal employees in English. And they really wanted to just expand its use and translate the user queries or its intents into German, Japanese, Spanish, and French. And so in this case, what we wanted to measure specifically was how well the chatbot could correctly match the translated intent to the English intent that was used then by the chatbot to generate the responses that the user would eventually interpret. And then we also wanted to understand just the subsequent satisfaction of the user with the actual chatbot based on the use of the MT. And so in order to evaluate this, the method we adopted alongside the client was to establish clear success rates, which we expressed as percentages. And these would reflect ultimately the accuracy of the translation for the user to actually engage and to use the translated intents in the chatbot. So for English, this success rate, was set at 95%. And for non-English, it was set at 85%. And then we were able to use the results that were obtained from this evaluation to further improve the translations later on in different applications. Okay, let's now turn our attention to a different industry and, of course, a different use case. This time, this is for a company that is specialized in online banking. And really, they were interested in transitioning from a full human translation workflow to one that involved MT and post-editing. And they wanted to really engage their internal team of linguists to perform the actual post-editing. So in this case, we wanted to evaluate whether implementing a workflow that includes MT post-editing actually leads to increased efficiency in relation to one that only uses human translators for the full process. So in order to assess this, we started by measuring the amount of content that was processed by internal linguists on a weekly and also on a monthly basis. First in a human translation only workflow, and then also in one in which MT plus post-editing was implemented. And in addition to measuring efficiency, we also worked to track the actual final quality of the translations that were produced in each workflow. And this was to help sort of supplement the evaluation and kind of combine the more objective data with subjective feedback to assess how MT can actually provide gains in terms of efficiency. So when we talk about the gains in efficiency, we can see that, I have this 10K figure here. The linguists beforehand in a full human workflow were able to process 10,000 words in a week, whereas with a machine translation workflow, they were able to process 30,000 words. So it's, quite a significant increase in efficiency. And this, again, represents another example of a good sort of scenario of MT evaluation because really we were guided by a clear objective, a clear goal, like Anna had mentioned, and because the results were also, again, used to inform later decisions about implementing MT for other languages as well. Okay, so we have another use case here, and in this one, a major online fashion retailer wanted to make an informed choice about whether to keep their storefront website in English, so that's the source language, or to perform raw MT to translate it into another language, or to actually use human post-editing in addition to MT to improve the quality of the translated pages even further. Ultimately, the goal here was to evaluate whether using raw MT or a workflow involving MT plus post-editing resulted in more visitors to the site, and also whether it led to them purchasing more products. So in this sense, there was a very clear business goal that helped to inform the method that was used to assess. And so, to evaluate whether raw MT or another MT workflow actually did lead to increased product purchasing by visitors, we collaborated with a client to process the translation for select pages, so for a small subset of them using raw MT, and post-editing for other pages. And then after we did that, we used A/B testing to, compare the conversion rates between the different translated pages to understand if the translated pages, if they actually led to higher conversion rates. So if they led to actually more folks visiting the site, and if they actually led to folks actually buying more products. So in this use case, the combination of a clear business goal with a tiered approach helped to provide, a more holistic understanding of how translation, and also specifically what type of translation, can lead to increased site visitors but also ultimately to higher conversion rates. And this is also a great example of how using, clear data, in this case, like I mentioned before, conversion rates and site visitors can also be excellent resources to help drive the MT evaluation and sort of structure the approach that's used. Okay, and for our last example here, because I think we're running a little short on time, so I'll try and hurry this one up. Here is an example of a scenario that is not really ideal, and I'm sure many of you will be able to figure out why pretty quickly. So in this case, a law firm was interested in using raw MT to translate some of their internal documents, and they specifically wanted to select a single provider for each language pair. And they wanted to select that provider based on what they determined to be, the best raw MT. So here, the firm was looking to, really evaluate how well the different providers handled their content. And of course, they turned to a lot of the more well-known publicly available providers like Google, Microsoft, et cetera. Unfortunately, due to, the very confidential nature of the client's content as a law firm, they did not allow their own content to be used for the actual MT evaluation, which of course is problematic because it is difficult to make any sort of educated assessment about the suitability of MT for a given language pair and a content type if we don't actually have access to that content type. So instead, they requested that content from publicly available corpora be used in place of their own content, and that BLEU and post-editing distance scores be calculated. So after we calculated these metrics, which again reflect the suitability of these engines to translate content that was not actually the client's own content, the best performing engine was selected for each language pair. And obviously, this type of evaluation is a little flawed, because it does not consider the importance of actually using the content that is reflective of what the engine will eventually be used to translate. And so this means that the metrics that we generated, so PED and BLEU scores, are only really an approximation. They're not a very clear, direct reflection of what the client can expect to receive. Okay. So as we near the end of the webinar here, we thought it might be important to review just some 3 quick takeaways. The first, as the title, of course, of this session suggests, is that MT on its own is not inherently good or bad, but rather it's just suitable or unsuitable for a very specific use case and also within a wider context, right? And kind of going along with that, any evaluation you perform of MT should have a very clearly established goal that is used to, guide how the assessment actually takes place, and sort of understands what we hope to achieve. And then related to this is this third takeaway, which is any data that you have that can help define a given business goal or need that can be applied to MT evaluation is very welcome and is in fact is great to use. So if, for example, you have your budget is X and your quality requirements are Y, and the most important markets for your content are Z, you'll want to include all of these in the MT evaluation so that we can have a clear indication of whether MT is suitable, and if so, how it should be implemented. And so, as we see MT continue to evolve, maybe, Anna, you can give us some insights into what is up next, what's on the horizon.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there are 3 main trends that I would mention here. One is more automated reporting. So as MT is becoming a common practice in the localization industry, more and more tools such as TMSs will incorporate this kind of reporting that is specific to MT quality. So just like what we showed, post-editing distance, but also linguist productivity and all the different metrics, and even human scores can be incorporated there as well, right? So some TMSs already offer this functionality, and I definitely see that more and more of them will offer it, and this really will become a standard feature. Then more user-friendly tools for MT comparison. Again, there are some tools that are appearing already, but I foresee that there will be tools where you can just upload your content, maybe reference translation in the form of a TM, or just content, just like source documents, and you will be able to choose different MT providers that you want to compare, and it will allow you to perform this comparison in a really user-friendly way. So this will enable really MT buyers to be more independent when it comes to MT evaluation. And then, of course, predictive quality estimation. Again, there are some tools, commercial tools, or in general, this technology is commercialized now. But again, I think this will become a very common feature in all CAT tools and TMSs. So yeah, I think the future is exciting. I'm really looking forward to also us working on these things and in general, the localization community. So I think on this optimistic note, we can start taking the questions.
Okay, thank you, Anna and Tai. Yes, we have quite a good number of questions. Let's see what we can do. First up is Jamie, and he asks, how often do you see a customer migrating from machine translation post-editing to straight machine translation? Is there a typical amount of time that a translation memory needs, that a machine translation probably, I think, Jamie, you mean machine translation needs to be trained before it's ready to move away from human involvement? Who wants to answer?
Tai, how about you take this one?
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, so if I understand correctly, the question was how long until we can transition basically from a MT post-editing workflow to one that's fully automated with just raw MT, maybe using the TM that's been accumulated to train an engine. Is that correct?
I think so, yes. Jamie, please reply in the chat if that's what you mean. Go on, Tai.
Okay, cool. Great. So this is an interesting question, and it's one that we certainly receive pretty frequently. I would say that there's no, if this presentation has showed, anything, it's that, every single use case is certainly different. And I would say that this question comes up a lot, but there's not a single sort of answer that I can give you. There's no sort of like timeline I can say, 5 months, 10 months, 2 years, et cetera, because it's contingent on a lot of different but interrelated factors. So things like how similar the content type that is being translated is fed into the translation memory. And it's also contingent on things like what's the volume, right? How often is new content, new TUs, new segments being added to the translation memory, right? A lot of times we don't actually treat this process as something that's meant to fully replace the human involvement, the human actor engaged in the process. But ultimately, we kind of view machine translation in general and in sort of a wider sense here at TransPerfect as actually the harmonization of the process and the efficiency afforded by the tech, but then also with the expertise of the linguists. So certainly there are cases that exist of the MT engine becoming so powerful and really accurate that it needs very little, if any, engagement by humans. But I would say that there's a very, very small number of cases where it fully replaces humans. So I would say at this point, I don't think we're completely there. I don't know if you want to add anything to that response, Anna, but.
No, I definitely agree. We're not there yet. And I'm not sure if we will be there at some point, because there are definitely a lot of use cases where humans will always be needed. But yeah, not right now.
Okay, thank you. Now, next up is a question from Antonios. And he goes back to the post-editing distance. I think was the part about that Anna presented. He says, not sure how you would calculate post-editing distance by using available translation memories. I expect this could only work for an engine that has been trained with a particular TM. So if not, due to stylistic differences, the text within the TM is likely to look rather different to the MT output. rendering the post-edit distance artificially bad. So can you please clarify?
Yeah, this is a very good question. And indeed, this is one more limitation of the post-editing distance calculation, right? So typically, the post-edit distance is an indicator of how much of the content was post-edited. But if we're using a translation memory that just includes human translations and machine translation was not used, it's not a real post-edit distance, right? So however, we still do it, but we keep in mind this limitation, but we still use this method because it still allows us to understand how good or bad the machine translation can be on this content, right? Of course, it's not the real post-edit distance because nothing was post-edited, but it still shows us the distance between the machine translation output and the correct translation. So in this case, it's still a good estimation of its quality. I hope it clarifies your question, but please let us know if you would like more clarifications.
Okay, excellent. Another question from Jamie again. Do you find a reduction in MT quality when translating between two non-English languages versus translating from or into English? Who wants to take this?
I can take this one.
Okay.
This is, I hate to keep going back to this, but it is really just, it's totally dependent on the use case, and it's totally dependent on the languages that are in scope. Certainly we can expect to see better quality between two non-English language pairs, two non-English languages that are very closely related. So think something like Spanish into Portuguese or vice versa, or maybe some of the Nordic languages, so Norwegian into Danish or Swedish, etc. So languages that are very closely related linguistically tend to actually sometimes even show better post-editing distance or better quality than their equivalent with English. Obviously, this is not the case with two languages that are very, very distant. So for example, recently we had something like, I think it was Korean into Finnish. And so those are two very complex languages just on their own, completely unrelated, and also in the given use case that they were being used in, it was difficult to ascertain how successful they would be. So I think it just depends really on the use case. Another big factor is also the size and the quality of the data that was used to create the MT engine that will be used eventually to translate the content. So Anna talked about overfitting earlier, so that's an issue that can also affect, ultimately the success, I guess we could say, of foreign into foreign. I don't like foreign into foreign, non-English into non-English language pairs.
Yeah. All right. Two questions from Eric. Let's see. I think the first question relates to the use case of the online retail client. So Eric, correct me if I misunderstand, but here's the question. Do you have any information about the company using the former translation team as post-editors? And did they have any success in keeping everyone, and were translators unhappy shifting to post-editing, or which is a common problem? We've heard about this, right?
Yeah. So if I understand the question correctly, the first part was, did we have any sort of issues with them staying on? So continuing with the task.
And shifting to post-editing, were there some kind of resistance?
Yeah. I think actually, Isabella, in a way you kind of answered the question there, which is that, so certainly in certain circumstances and with certain content types, we do see a little bit of resistance, especially things that tend to be a little bit more creative, or things that need a little bit more of maybe a marketing flair. I think in certain industries, so I mentioned life sciences earlier as being an industry that is very, very deeply entrenched in its use of MT. And there, I think that you would be hard pressed most of the time to find a linguist that hasn't at some point used MT, or that doesn't actively participate in post-editing, maybe as their primary service offering in addition to, regular from scratch translation.
Yeah.
So it really does depend on the industry. I think in the case of, I think it was actually the bank that had the internal linguists. They were actually, I think, pretty happy to have an increase in the efficiency. I don't remember anybody like dropping off. I think that there's always sort of a period of adjustment, and this is something we didn't mention in this presentation, but in addition to giving instructions for linguists when we ask them to evaluate, we also give them very thorough post-editing training because it's a very different service than translation. So we don't want them to think of this as sort of replacing them or making them obsolete, but rather it's just a different way for them to ultimately perform the same task and, ensure the same quality. So.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
It's actually 6 o'clock, but there are 3 more questions. And if you guys don't mind, stay on another 5 minutes. We're going to tackle them. Yeah.
I'm happy to, yeah.
Okay.
I'm fine, yeah. And just to add to the previous question, I just want to reiterate that the training is very, very important. We've seen it many times, and this is also something that we support our customers with, right? If we provide MT, we also provide this training, because whenever we started MT implementation in this way without any training, the initial part of the project was quite hard.
Excellent, thank you. So another question from Eric. Can you explain a little bit more about what predictive quality estimation is and how that works?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I like that you say that sounds like a machine translation will be evaluating itself. It's a little bit like that, because the systems are also based on AI algorithms, essentially, right? And of course, we would use them only in the situations where a correct reference translation is not available. When it's available, of course, other metrics are more accurate. So these systems are usually trained on a lot of data, just like machine translation systems. And what we give it is a lot of source text, machine translation, and also the correct translation. So they basically learn, given a source text and the machine translation, how much kind of changing or how many changes were done to the machine translation to get to the correct translation. And then based on this knowledge that the system learns, it can estimate it only if you give it the source text and the machine translation text. So this is in a nutshell, really. And there are a lot of systems like this that are being evaluated in the research community, and not so many that are commercialized, but we will see in the next few years.
Good. Okay, let's move on to another question from Daniel. Are there any use cases for which LEPOR would provide a better evaluation than, for example, BLEU? Who wants to take this?
I can take this one as well, actually. To be honest, in our case, we haven't experimented with LEPOR a lot. We still prefer the post-edit distance just because it's very explainable and easier to understand. But I do know that in terms of just measuring performance, in some experiments, LEPOR has shown better performance than BLEU. So I'm sure there are certain use cases where it would be more beneficial, but in our case, we don't have a lot of experience with it.
Okay, excellent. Let's see. Another question from Monica. If you train one MT engine with a client-specific translation memory, do you use later this MT engine for other clients with same content or similar content type? How do you handle the data, basically?
Yeah, I can answer that one. The answer is no, because there's actually 2 reasons. So the first is obviously sort of a more pragmatic one, and it's this idea of it's proprietary content, right? And so we honor the agreements that we have with our clients to only use their proprietary engines with their content. And the second reason is a little bit more related to, I think, what Anna mentioned in the presentation, which is even if a client has similar content, we can think of the efficiency and the efficacy of a machine translation as only being as good as the content that's used to train it. And so, you know, if we have content A and we use that to train the MT engine, and then we use that trained engine on content B, we can't necessarily expect, right, as good of results as we would if we used it to translate content A1, A2, right? So the idea is no. The short answer is no, and the two reasons are that. So we have confidentiality agreements, and we also have, you know, clauses to protect sort of our clients' data. But then in addition to that, a lot of times it doesn't make sense. So
yeah, exactly. And finally, last question from Amy. Does Transperfect provide services for continuous or agile localization?
Right, I can take this one. So I'm not completely sure what agile localization is, but we do provide support for software localization for agile workflows, right? So I'm not sure how exactly this ties into the topic of MT evaluation. So if you could maybe clarify, I'd be happy. But in any case, if you reach out to us, we can put you in touch with their people who handle this at Transperfect.
Exactly. And by the way, for those who haven't noticed, Anna's and Ty's emails are on the screen right now. So I think you guys will be happy to continue this conversation maybe with the participants. So Anna and Ty, thank you so much for this presentation, very interesting. And a big thank you to all the attendees, especially the ones that stayed after 6 o'clock. I know that it's for some people, it's the end of the day, for others, it's just the beginning, and we're all very busy. When I close the webinar, you'll see a post-webinar survey. I invite you to fill it out, because first of all, your feedback helps us to refine our webinar program. Two, we'd like to know, what do you find interesting, what kind of topics? And three, if someone's interested in presenting at GALA, please let us know and we'll consider it. Now, next week, we have another webinar. This time it's going to be on transforming and adapting to a new workflow ecosystem. And it's going to be presented by Natalia Rudinskaya from Genus Worldwide. But we're going to have some fun as well in 2 weeks' time on July 29th. We're going to have a GALA Lock Mix, which is open to members and non-members. So Anna and Ty, you're both invited, and everyone else is, of course, invited. If you go to the GALA website under events, you'll find the web page where you can register, and please do join us. So for now, Anna, Ty, everybody, thank you again. Have a good day or a good evening, depending on where you are. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you at another GALA event very soon. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.